First, a number of European countries are insisting they will not be sending troops to Ukraine after French President Emmanuel Macron said that the idea should not be ruled out. The Kremlin, meanwhile, warned of the inevitability of a direct conflict between NATO and Russia if the alliance sends them. This all comes as U.S. President Joe Biden met with congressional leaders today, warning them of the dire consequences if Ukraine doesn't get $60 billion in additional military aid. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz today ruling out the suggestion that European countries and NATO alliance members would send ground troops to Ukraine, one day after the French president raised the prospect that some might have to.
It was discussed that what had been agreed upon from the beginning also applies to the future, namely that there will be no ground troops, no soldiers on Ukrainian soil sent there by European countries or NATO states.
Elsewhere, speaking in Prague ahead of a summit with the leaders of Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary, Polish President Donald Tusk also rejected the idea while calling on other European countries to step up monetary and ammunition support.
So what's needed today is that more countries follow Poland and the Czech Republic in their determination to help Ukraine. And I don't want to sound too harsh, but if all EU countries share Poland and the Czech Republic's attitude, we wouldn't need to discuss any other measures of support.
It was not immediately clear how many other countries supported Emmanuel Macron's suggestion, though the French leader had emphasized that there was no consensus at this stage, even as allies agreed to boost efforts to supply munitions to Kiev. Some 20 European leaders gathered in Paris on Monday to send Russian President Vladimir Putin a message of European resolve on Ukraine and counter the Kremlin's narrative that Russia is bound to win the war now in its third year. Meanwhile, the Kremlin warned that a conflict between Russia and NATO would be inevitable if members of the alliance were to send troops to Ukraine. Speaking to reporters after Macron's remarks, a Kremlin spokesperson said the very fact of discussing the possibility of sending certain contingents to Ukraine from NATO countries is a very important new element. In that case, we would need to talk not about the probability, but about the inevitability, referring to direct conflict with NATO members. Meanwhile, in Washington, U.S. President Joe Biden met behind closed doors with the top 4 congressional leaders today. The high-stakes talks were designed to overcome key partisan objections to current spending bills, with additional aid for Ukraine topping the list with the GOP, as Biden says the support for Ukraine is desperately needed.
I think the consequences of inaction every day in Ukraine are dire. I've been speaking to some of our G7 partners, and you just got back, Chuck. They're very concerned.
House Speaker Mike Johnson has refused to bring a recently passed Senate foreign aid bill to the floor of his chamber. The Senate bill includes aid for Ukraine, a key sticking point for many Republicans. Biden is also calling on lawmakers to agree on a deal that would prevent a government shutdown. If something isn't done, some federal agencies and programs will run out of funding at the end of the month. But after the meeting, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell sounded encouraged that a deal on Ukraine aid will be reached.
The meeting on Ukraine was one of the most intense I have ever encountered in my many meetings in the Oval Office. This was so important. And that we couldn't afford to wait a month or 2 months or 3 months because we would, in all likelihood, lose the war.